I really enjoyed this panel. You talked about Beyonce, my favorite singer, Fenty, my favorite brand, and I also don't purchase any beauty products that are not Black owned, so I love that. Next, we're gonna have our second panel titled Understanding the Significance of the Hispanic Market, and this panel will be moderated by Professor Francisco Quevedo.
Okay, thank you for that enlightening prior panel and presentation. A lot of things, a lot of notes that I took that could help us discuss this topic that we have in our hands. With me is Ozzie Godinez. He's the CEO and co-founder of PACO Collective. It's an agency dedicated to the Hispanic market coming out of Chicago. So welcome to Newark, New Jersey. He's from Mexico, a native of Guadalajara. Yes, he is. And I asked him, how do you call people from Guadalajara? And he gave me the, let's say, the notation. He's been, let's say, an expert in multicultural approach, especially to the Hispanic market. His agency is a full-service agency and has as clients such names as Blue Cross Blue Shield, the Chicago Bears, and the White Sox. He was a little late because he was talking to the New York Mets and the New York Yankees, right? All right. Sort of. No, he wasn't late at all. The other panelist would be Ramon Nieves or Ramon Nieves. He's the CEO of, hi Ramon. He's the CEO of Unicom Media. He's in Greenfield, South Carolina, beautiful city, by the way, beautiful river in the middle. Right. With waterfalls. He's from Puerto Rico. And he's recognized as an authority in multicultural marketing and Hispanic, of course, the Hispanic segment in particular. He's in several board of directors, so I'm not going to comment in particular, but one of them is the Greenfield Chamber of Commerce, right? And he is a graduate of Bob Jones University and has received indeed many awards for his multicultural marketing achievements, all right? So Ozzie will give us a presentation. I'd like to set the stage, if you don't mind. For us Hispanics, when I remember with the caravans of migrants, one major U.S. news network said that they were coming from several Mexican countries. And then when you watch people, for example, in a, I don't know, Costa Rican setting or Puerto Rican setting, they play Mexican music behind it. So I guess that's how much they know. And hopefully we can enlighten the market regarding the Hispanic culture and how diverse indeed we are. All right. So with no more introduction, the general questions you all have and shared, how significant is the Hispanic market? How can we address the Hispanic market? Are there any specific data that you could share with us? That basically sets the tone, all right? So no further intro. Ozzie, the podium is yours.
Great. Can you guys hear me good? Bueno, me dijeron que tengo que hacer toda la presentación en español. Espero que todos entiendan porque va a haber una prueba después. No, I'm just kidding. That was my lame attempt at humor. It worked. You guys laughed. So I couldn't really talk about the significance of the Hispanic market. Oh, by the way, that last panel was awesome. I was itching to talk about a lot of stuff they were talking about because it kind of echoes what we do and the struggles actually sometimes that we face as a marketing agency and how much education we still need to do to the point that Francisco just mentioned. So let's see if this is going to work. All right, so I'm going to start with some data just to sort of ground the conversation, because again, we can't talk about the impact of the Hispanic market without really grounding that this conversation in some good data, some trends, and then we'll have some really good fodder after that to talk. Okay, it's not working. Next slide, please. So this, and a lot of this, by the way, you guys, probably not new to you, just to level set that you may be aware with some of these numbers and trends, but the numbers are astounding, right? When you think about where the market is headed, 30% of the population by the year 2060 will be Hispanic, a third almost. The numbers continue to grow year over year. And I'm going to drill down actually into what happened this past census, because that is significant. Next slide, please. One more slide. You can hit it, I think, 4 times. You're going to build here. So it's definitely a changing. And then, so when we talk about the mainstream, it's this is the new America, right? So we saw a huge decline in whites for the first time ever. The growth really from 2010 was driven by Hispanic, Asian, Black, and really multiracial, which was a huge also increase from previous census. That's 23 million folks. It's a lot of people. 40% of Americans identify as non-white. Just think about that. Let that set in for a while in terms of where we were and where we're at and where we're going, right? And then since 1980, Hispanics, Asians have quadrupled. That will happen and continue to happen. I know someone else is going to talk about the impact of the Asian market in a little bit, but just my focus is going to be on Hispanic, but understanding the numbers is important. Next slide, please. So, you know, and we've already talked about this minority majority. This is where we're headed. 2040 will be there. There are a lot of people that are scared of this, you guys. They're scaring the crap out of some folks. We'll talk about that, what that means. The idea of a minority majority, I never thought that would happen actually in my lifetime, and it's going to happen, and it's creating some significant impacts across education, especially friggin' politics, which I'm going to touch on a little bit. We're not going to get into a political discussion, but I will touch on it. It would be disingenuous if we didn't talk about that, because there's some things that are really important that specifically related to this market, and then just marketers in general, how we're going to address that. Next slide, please. So the Hispanic market is 62 million strong, huge, 19% of the population, and 23% growth since 2010. Now, think about, let me put this in perspective, actually, kind of take a step back. So if the US Hispanic market was a country, it would be bigger than the entire population of Canada. Okay, think about that for a second. The other thing that's really interesting about the Hispanic market in the US is that the US is the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. Now think about that also and what that means as a marketer, right? And so keeping these numbers or understanding what these numbers actually mean is really important. Next slide. And this is probably one of the most important slides you're going to see today, is that and you probably have seen this graphic before. A lot of people use it, but I love it because it really, Latinos are not a monolith, man. We're not all the same. We come from very different countries, actually 20 countries, more than 20 countries. Actually, we're going to talk about, I'm going to show you a slide on that in a second. You know, the ethnic backgrounds vary greatly by regions. The dialect, the Spanish, while we all have the Spanish as a common thread, it still varies. There's some variations in terms of what we call certain things. And as marketers, it's really, really, really important to note that. And we're going to talk about this actually as it relates to politics in a second, because this is probably one of the most eye-opening things we have seen over this past two cycles of elections. Next slide, please. Oh, this is my favorite. Oh my gosh, are you Spanish? This literally happened to me yesterday as I was having dinner at a local restaurant here at the bar. Someone came, I was speaking to the waitress and I was speaking to her in Spanish, and someone next to me, white, asked me, "Oh my God, are you Spanish?" I said, "Nope, I speak Spanish. I'm actually Mexican." The other one that I get all the time, this one's super interesting. "Oh, you speak Mexican?" I'm like, "Oh, you speak American?" and you get this quizzical look, right? Like what just happened? So there's a lot of sort of ignorance in terms of how people categorize us and paint us with a broad brush, right? We can't do that. It's disingenuous to say the least, right? Next slide, please. So this is, I talked about this, we represent over 20 countries, right? Mexicans make up the majority. And so there is wide variety in terms of the population in the US. And also geographically, it varies differently in the United States, right? So think about, you have more Cuban, Caribbean in South Florida, right? LA is predominantly Mexican. Texas is Mexican, but has a huge Salvadorian population as well. New York, New Jersey, right? Very Korean, Puerto Rican. So you have, it varies across the board. And so the idea as marketers of taking all of that into consideration when you're creating campaigns is critical in understanding what the data tells you, right? And how do you take the data and turn that into an insight to a TV spot, a radio spot that actually connects culturally is super important, right? Next slide. This one. So you say habichuelas, I say frijoles. Habichuelas and frijoles, same beans. That's what it means, right? Certain regions of Spanish-speaking countries call it habichuelas. I personally call them frijoles. I remember saying to my mom, just as an experiment, "Mom, ¿qué estás preparando? Habichuelas." And she looked at me and she said, "¿Qué es eso?" Like, what is that? In this quizzical shock look, I said, frijoles. As Mexicans, we say frijoles. Many other regions understand it as habichuelas. My point here is that this matters as marketers, right? And taking a deep dive into your segments, into who you're talking to is really, really important. The other thing that's happening with language in general, look, we speak Spanish, we speak English, we speak Spanglish, but we always speak culture first, and that is critically important. One of the things that we see also is this new lexicon that Latinos in the US are creating. What does that mean? We're making up words, adding to the dictionary. I'll give you a really quick example. The translation for the truck, let's take truck. The actual translation meaning of truck you drive is camioneta. It's very common, right? It has been, the idea of truck has been converted into troca, which means camioneta. Troca is not a word in the Spanish dictionary, but it's completely become part of the lexicon of many Spanish speakers here in the US. And so the interesting part about that is that you've seen marketers take advantage of that, where they're using that exact word to create campaigns. That's powerful, right? That's a fundamental understanding of these consumers and how they sort of speak in their terms, right? And that's really, again, important in the way there's Spanish purists that would hate me for saying that, but it's the reality of what's happening, right? We see it all the time. There's countless words that have been added into the Spanish lexicon in the US. One more. Oh, so the impact is nothing new here. It's been here for decades. I think we're finally seeing that highlighted, over the last 20 years, in particular, the last probably 10 years. Next slide, please. And no more is it prevalent in sort of when we got mainstream media. Think about the popularity of Coco, right? That's been translated into a million different languages, right? There's a new one, Encanto, which is based, if you guys aren't familiar with it, it's a Colombian sort of based insight for that. I think it's released next month, actually. And then you're seeing the power, Nielsen talked about the streaming Netflix, right? And across the board, streaming in general, and the popularity of some of these series that we're seeing in there, adding a ton of Latino-focused content across the board. And it's really powerful because it really captures the culture in ways we've never seen. And again, super important. Next slide, please. All right, question for you guys. What's the most viewed, you can't answer, Francisco, because I think you know the answer to this, music video in the world in 2020? What was it? You guys. Next slide, please. Despacito by Luis Fonsi and Daddy Yankee. So, and notice what I said, in the world, not in the US, in the world. I think it was just surpassed this year, by the way, you guys, for the that shark kids video, which is just annoying as heck. But that video just overtook, or that YouTube video just overtook Despacito. But think about the power of Despacito, right? And it's the all Spanish version, by the way. Many people want to attribute Justin Bieber to the success. It's the Spanish only version that basically is the number one, or was the number one streaming video in the world in 2020. Next slide, please. I'm going to go to the next ones pretty quickly so we can get in with the discussion. Nielsen talked a lot about this most popular playlist on Spotify. Look at within the top 10, you see Spanish focused or Latino focused music playlists. This is also true Pandora and a bunch of others. You know, the numbers are staggering. You know, while most of those listening are Latino, there's a ton of crossover into what we call general market, right? So the popularity of the music genre has crossed over completely into other demographics. Next slide, please. And so this was really interesting too, because the most popular, I don't know if it got cut off, but the top, it's Mexican, Chinese, and then Thai, in terms of just the most popular ethnic cuisine. And I didn't make up this title, but it bothered me because there's no such thing as ethnic food. Ethnic food is American food now. If you have it and just walk outside and you see that representation, there is no such thing as ethnic food. It is American food, and it's here to stay. You're seeing a blurring of all of these, you know, Korean barbecue tacos. I never thought that would be a thing. It's a thing, and they're delicious if you've never had them. Southern California has tons of those food trucks. It's amazing what's happening, and you're seeing the lines just blur. Next slide. This was interesting. I walk into first time, true story, in Subway, and they had avocado spread, and I looked, I'm like, dang, when did avocado become a spread? Like, it's a staple for most of us. But I never thought of it as a spread. It's guacamole, or you just slice it and eat it, right? But it's like it's a thing. Now it's an avocado toast, and they charge you a heck of a lot for that, by the way. It's delicious, but they charge you a heck of a lot. You know, it's a staple. It's crossed over. It's the power of the Hispanic market. Make salsa. Salsa replaced ketchup probably 20 years ago. I don't know if you guys know it. It completely is the condiment of choice. And there's tons of examples of this that we see in the marketplace. Again, the influence of the Hispanic culture into the broader mainstream. And we don't really take a step back and how did that happen? Well, because we're all here, right? Next slide. And it's delicious. And I think this is maybe the last couple slides here. So I think one of the popular narratives that you see is that while there's a lot of socioeconomic, a lot of political turmoil right now, Hispanics by and large are still super optimistic about the American dream. They still believe in this. We are seeing this play out right now in real time with the number of new businesses and startups that are happening in the US. And Latinas are driving the bulk of that, right? You're going to see Latina badasses create some seriously cool stuff moving forward, businesses, tech, all kinds of stuff that we're seeing just prevalent playing out in real time. And this is absolutely true. This will be the economic engine. A lot of studies have already talked about this. This will be the economic engine that drives the economy forward in the next 10 years. Next slide, please. And so what does this all mean? Let's go to the next slide. We're not a monolith, really, is where I want to end. And then there's one more slide. We're all very different. No more. So did this play out in this next slide? We saw a huge, huge shift politically over the the 2016 election. It was eye-opening. A lot of it really was not doing the due diligence from a just research perspective to really understanding what was happening in the US specific to Latinos. And so you saw this, and we saw it again in this last election. There are a lot of reasons why this is happening. I'm not going to get into all of them, but the point here is that there's an assumption that all Latinos are Democrat and will vote Democrat. The last election just blew that theory out of the water, made people look really silly, quite frankly. And so there's political ramifications, obviously, with making assumptions also, because this led to a lot of assumptions that were just completely based on they have always voted that way, and that's absolutely not true. A third, I think, in George W. Received about 3% Latino vote when he was elected twice. So it's repeating itself. There's a lot. This is a whole other, like, we could spend hours talking about this. Not going to get into it. It's not a political sort of position here, but simply saying that the research matters, understanding the target matters, and understanding the implications really matters. And I think, next slide. I'm going to leave it with that, and then we can get into, okay, so let's talk about all this stuff. Like, there's a lot here. So, Francisco.
All right. Thanks a lot. Gracias. Ramon, I'd like to hear your comments on this. Where are you, Ramon? Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. No, Ozzie did a great job on putting the numbers, right? Putting the layout, the numbers. Was the influence that the Hispanic community is having in mainstream America, was happening in those areas. You know, my only reaction to this is my focus, what I see a lot of this movement is on the household. It's like, what's going on in the Hispanic household? What's the impact that's happening there? And then also, where are Hispanic moving? I am a Hispanic marketing agency in Greenville, South Carolina, not Miami, not Chicago, not LA. I started 11 years ago an agency in Greenville, South Carolina. And guess what? What was the fastest Hispanic growth, happening? North Dakota, South Dakota, Tennessee, Georgia. You're seeing that growth happening outside of those big areas. So Ozzie laid out really well in showing that Hispanics are influencing not only the big areas, but also the small areas. And so, for example, my wife, she's from Greenville. She's a Southern girl. And my daughter, she's 2. And she's growing up to be bilingual. Her dominant language is Spanish. And it is something that I want her to be proud of. And so one of the biggest things that I noticed on the data set that we saw and that we're seeing now is that US born Latinos, 91% of them speak Spanish, speak English, speak it very well. But then guess what? 51% of them connect with their origins. They really say, even though I speak English, I still connect myself with Latino, my origins, which is my family, where I'm from. And that's huge. That's a huge importance compared to whites, that is 23% that connects to their roots. So, so everything that Ozzie laid out is pretty much just like saying what's going on, how has it been impacted? And what we're seeing is what's going on in the Hispanic household. What's that impact, the American impact that's going on, and how they're impacting. And it's very interesting. It's very interconnected. I'm bicultural, bilingual, like Ozzie, and we jump this cultural fence, right? We speak English, we speak Spanish, we speak Mexicano, right? I get that too, I will say habichuelas is the right way to say it, no frijoles. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding with you, Ozzie. But instead of troca, what my favorite one is? Instead of yard, yarda. I hear yarda all the time. Yarda all the time. If you want to hear a lot of made up words in the construction business, Latinos, Hispanic are making up words left and right there. Like I was blown away in that. But like I said, I'm proud to see agencies like Ozzie, like doing things like they're doing, because they're helping a new generation like us and other ones growing up, saying we can impact the community, we can impact brands and understand what's going on. And so, again, like I said, it's awesome to see the stats and a very good job Ozzie doing that.
Thank you.
All right. One question I have is for the American audience. How different are we? And I'll ask you, how different are Hispanic consumers as compared to other, let's say, communities and as compared to whites? How different are we?
Also, you can take that one.
So, that's a layered answer to that question. I think, so there's multiracial households. When you think about the households, right? Think about the differences inherently that are made up within that, right? Or that are built into that. The idea of, as an example, having your grandmother live elsewhere does not exist versus sort of general market, right? We don't put our grandmothers in nursing homes, they stay and they live with us till, the end, right? I think there is a sort of the nuclear family, the nucleus of the family is still super intact. Not that it isn't on the general market sort of white side. There's just there different sort of meaning to that, right? And so as a result, you see higher purchasing power, right? And buying power, because you're buying more stuff from more people in the house. I mean, just simply doing the numbers makes sense, right? And so, we could look at then differences, in sort of educational attainment versus general market, but it's almost not an equivalent sort of comparison. Simply put, there are more folks in the household working anyway, right? So you have multiple wage earners across different levels. And the other thing is just the idea of aspirations and the American dream, as I mentioned, is still alive and well. And I think you're seeing just that optimism on the other side, not there versus most immigrants, quite frankly. Latinos make a big chunk of that, still sort of optimistic about, that's a stark sort of difference that we see. And you see it in like home purchases, like Latinos over-index by a huge number for home purchases just in general right now. And so versus general market, right? White Caucasian. And so you're seeing this again all play out despite the popular narrative, right? Of Latinos. So I'll let you answer or add to that, sorry.
Yeah, no, this is awesome that you're saying. I'll answer that question. It is layered. You're right. There's so many layers to that. I'll answer it this way. In the feeling connected to the roots. I'm going to say that as sort of 36% of whites say they feel connected to their roots. Almost 80%. This is from the Pew Hispanic Center. 80% of Hispanics feel connected to their roots. That's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. And I think that right there tells me a lot about what's going on in the Latino, what's the difference between a Hispanic community and the white. And then you start layering all those over indexes, like Ozzie mentioned, over indexing in social media, over indexing in buying homes. That's always been saying, like, what are Latinos over indexing in what area? But it's just, I say that's the biggest difference. And that being connected to those roots really play a huge difference, a huge influence in their buying behavior and their influences. And like Ozzie said, my mom, my parents live down the road, and my family lives down the road. Like, we're very close. So there's a lot of things in that sense. So that's kind of my thoughts are in there.
All right, and just to get you into trouble, how similar are we to the white majority? I mean, how much alike are we?
You want to go first? No, you got me thinking. Well, I'll say this is the drive to grow. That's what I've seen with white and Hispanic is just we want to continue to grow. We want to continue to make an impact and make a difference in our families' lives, no matter where they come from. That's been like what I've seen with people that in DC, for example. I was with a client down in DC, and I met Salvadorian families, and they all tell me, it's like, I just want to be better. Like where I came from, I just want to be better at what I did. And so that's what I see. The similarity is just they want to be, they want to growth, and they want to grow, make a better life for themselves. So that's kind of like what I'm thinking when I'm saying.
I'll add a little bit, just some color on what you said. You're right on, Ramon. I think the thing that we're seeing, that's getting used to wearing this thing, is sort of economic prosperity. It's one of the things that you see that's sort of universally true. I think true for both Latinos and non-Latinos. The way you get there obviously is very different, but you're seeing that, and you look at polls also where what are the most critical things, right, happening now or more important to you now, and you see some similarities on economic sort of progress, forward mobility, educational attainment. Again, those are those are what people say. What they do is very different, right? And so those are the big ones that we're seeing where there's similarities, sort of universally true. But again, how you get there is very different, and what the numbers, it's what people tell you. What they actually do is it's different.
All right. I'm watching your watch, and I thought, wow, God, we're 1 hour ahead of time. That's Chicago time, right?
Chicago time.
Chicago time.
Okay, so we're not. Will we be absorbed into the mainstream? 80% of us identify with our cultural roots. I mean, I'm Venezuelan. I eat arepas at least once a week. We don't call frijoles or habichuelas. We call them differently, caraotas and things like that. We have different words. For us, ahora means later, and ahorita means right now. Maybe for you, it means the opposite. Things like that. But will we become the Italians of the future? You go to Italian homes and they don't speak Italian. La nonna is no longer there and they don't speak Italian. You go to a Spanish home and they do speak Spanish at home, and they don't want the nannies to speak English. So they hire Hispanic nannies so the children speak Spanish at home. But will we be, and this is the ending question, the trend, will we be absorbed into the mainstream, or will we remain that let's say, that population that's strongly rooted in their Hispanic heritage?
All right, I'll start, Ramon. No, that's not going to happen. It probably already started happening. If you look at, and the assimilation model is sort of broken when you think about it. What you describe, Italians, Irish, assimilated, they came to the country, adopted all things American, and completely assimilated to be an American. What's happened with Latinos is you immigrated, you uprooted wherever you, Chicago, Miami, New York, Los Angeles, Houston, whatever. And that the acculturation grew, but then basically stopped. And so there is it plateaued is probably the best way to describe it, not stopped, because you're still seeing some of that happening, but it stopped or plateaued rather, where Latinos are living in the best of both worlds. We call them the 200%ers, right? 100% Latino, 100% American. I weave in out of those cultures as I see fit. For Thanksgiving, we have turkey, jamón, tamales, tortillas, frijoles, habichuelas. Yeah, and we have a turkey. But that is the blurring of what's happening, and I don't see an end to that. In fact, the opposite is happening. And think about the stats that I just showed. The opposite of exactly what you asked is happening in the U.S. And so, yeah, I mean, no, Francisco.
All right, and when we're assimilating too much, here comes, I don't know, Shakira, and reminds us of our roots. Ramon, any closing words?
For me is retroculturation. That's kind of what I'm seeing. I'll share a story real quick. I was in Texas, in Houston. I met a gentleman who, when I looked at him, he's like Latino. We were at a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce conference, and I started talking Spanish to him. And he says, I don't speak Spanish. I was like, what? Wow. You know, like, and he had a Latino name and everything. But he told me he's 5th generation Hispanic. His grandmother, great grandmother was were in Texas when Texas was part of Mexico. Like, I mean, I was just like all these, but he recognized the importance of learning the language, of going back to your cultural roots. And he said to me, I am actually teaching my daughters to speak Spanish. I'm letting them learn like our culture and our roots. And you know, that's what my grandfather, when he came from Puerto Rico to New York for a little bit, it was not cool to be Puerto Rican. It was not cool to speak Spanish. And I cannot believe, like, wow, back when he was like younger, really? Like, and now it's cool. So as long as there is a immigration, you know, still happening, and there's still influence, you know, like me doing my part, reaching, telling my daughter, hey, this is part of your roots. This is who you are. You know, I think you're gonna still see the Hispanic community flourish and grow. I can't predict the future, but I can tell you what's happening right now. So.
All right. Thank you to my speakers and panelists, and thank you all for listening. I guess by the stats, we're not moving despacito then. All right. Thanks a lot.
We are not.
just for 1 second, I know I want to make sure that you guys kind of were late 10 minutes. So I want to make sure I give you some extra time. So if you have one more question, you can ask another question, or if not, I have questions. So
Just, great, because you did mention Camila Cabello. I mean, it didn't mention them by name, but Hispanic music is out there. First, it was Miami Sound Machine in Gloria Estefan, and Julio Iglesias and his kid and things like that. Is that part of that let's say that influence that is keeping us tied to our roots? I ask that question.
Yeah, I mean, I will say yes. I mean, music and food is keeping us there. I mean, I was just kind of my aunt came from Puerto Rico, and that's what we were just talking about. You know, just kind of talking like she brought us a bunch of food from Puerto Rico that was missing. You know, and I was just like, I need this. You know, and then now my daughter loves that bread. You know, pan sobao, we call it pan sobao. You know, it's like soft bread. You know, it's just like, wow, you know, we miss that. But, you know, food, what I noticed is the culture is like food and music are just big. And we did this little work with a brand that was on music. Similar thing, you know, music is a way to really share who you are and share who you are. And Despacito was 2 Puerto Ricans, right? You know, so, but, you know, everybody loves it. You know, it's like everybody, you know, it's like they don't know the Puerto Rican. They just know it's like a great song. But, you know, in Puerto Rico, we were influenced by Mexicans, you know, Mexican influence, Mexican food, Mexican singers. And that has led to just a lot of things that grow. So as long as they're influenced in music and there's influence in the food, you're always going to see the Latinos grow and flourish.
Ozzie?
Yeah, I mean, the popularity and the numbers back that up, right, based on what you guys just saw. But I mean, I think when you look at just the culture in general, the things that sort of are always constant, music, right? Food is like, not only does it nourish physically, but it nourishes the soul. Think about what happens over the dinner table or the kitchen. As you know, my mom is making tamales, it goes beyond the actual food, right? So all of these things, you know, play into the nostalgia of those things play into just us uprooting here in the US, and that's here to stay. That's not going to go anywhere. I mean, in fact, you saw all of this, it's crossing over to the other side. And so the idea is not going away anytime soon.
You said you had questions.
To see if you had any tips or suggestions for students as they look into this market?
That is a great question. We're actually having a really hard time finding talent right now in the agency world. It's been really, really hard because of the pandemic, and then just people are moving out into other jobs. You know, the thing that I would say is internships are really important to get your foot in the door. And I think, you know, especially as people of color, we have so much value to share, and we don't even know it. Honestly, I talk to kids all the time. I have no idea how much your personal experience, your lens, the way you see the world has that value. It's like you can't even monetize that, because that is what brands are looking for, because they don't look like me and all of you guys, right? And there's I could talk to my daughters about that. You have superpowers that you don't even know yet that you have. And so there's so much value in that. The experiences, again, brands want to see that in their ads, and we can bring that to life. So internships, you got to hustle, right? Like nothing's going to be handed to you, but you got to hustle. And the ad industry has a variety of jobs across, you know, from copywriters to strategists to designers. You know, we call ourselves cultural strategists on inclusive marketing. That's what we do, right? And so there's a lot of jobs that fall within just the advertising spectrum. Ramon, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You know, internship. I think on top of what Ozzie said, which is perfect, what I recommend is, you know, if you are interested in working with a brand or agency that is, you know, reaching Hispanic market or doing different things, just go in and look at their biggest brand, what's the brand that they're working on, and just go in there like saying, this is what I would do, right? This is my culture. This is the lens that I put out there. And, the agents, you're not, yeah, you're pitching yourself, but you're not going to be changing the brand immediately, but you're at least showing that agency or brand that this is my perspective. This is what I would do. This is maybe what you're missing, your blind spot, your cultural blind spot, right? Maybe that you're missing as a brand or agency. And we in the agency gotten several students have reached out to us. So don't be afraid to us and reach out and say, hey, do you have any internships? Even though the website doesn't say it, but this is what I would like to do, and this is what I bring. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, let's talk, because also he said it right. It's a tough time right now to find people. And even here in Greenville, we're having a tough time finding people, but it's been awesome just to see the talent pool. People are reaching out and saying, hey, this is kind of what I'm doing. This is my point of view. Can I help? How can I be part of it?
Right. Thank you so much. I'm going to show them. Let's show them how we Hispanics do it. Un abrazo, hermano.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed this panel, and I loved to see the overlap. So I have a Caribbean background, so I love hearing the overlap between all the different cultures and my own culture. So